Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Mad Profit podcast. My name is Laurent Truc. I wanted to do a little preamble to this next episode that we're doing because it's a bit different. We interviewed Ryan Sorensen and David Carroll, both business brokers in the online space. One is a seller broker, one is a buyer broker. So very interesting to get their take on the industry. It ended up being a pretty long interview. So we decided to cut this into two segments. The first one is very much about the industry of online businesses and their thoughts about the direction it's going in and the process of buying and selling these businesses. The latter part is more around a new venture that they're putting together, which is a brokerage really focused on cannabis-based online businesses. So really interesting. I hope you stay tuned for both part one and part two. Today, we're going to focus on part one only, and then we'll do the next one next week. Looking forward to diving right in. Thank you.
Welcome to the Mad Profit Podcast, where we interview active investors, entrepreneurs, and experts who left corporate jobs to buy or start successful ventures and live life on their own terms. Listen to their stories, learn from their experiences, and heed their advice so you too can create mad profits and the life you've always wanted. And now, here's your host, Laurent Truc.
Thanks, everybody, and welcome back to the Mad Profit Podcast. I'm excited. I've got two very special guests today. I'm actually going to let them introduce themselves. Ryan, go ahead. Kick us off.
We got Ryan Sorensen here from acquisitionstation.com.
How are you, Ryan? And David?
All right, and I'm David Carroll from DJC Digital Brokers.
Perfect. So, guys, thank you so much for making the time and joining us on the podcast today.
No problem.
I'm really excited about this. I have yet to interview anybody that's hardcore in the space that's worked with as many sellers and buyers on both sides that you guys have. So very much looking forward to getting into your heads, understanding the market, some of the new stuff that you guys are working on, which is pretty exciting. And I think this will be a very interesting conversation. So why don't we get a little bit of background from you guys? Ryan, if you don't mind starting us off, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? How did you get from inception to here? And talk to us a little bit about who you are.
All right. So first I was born in 1984. And then in 2009, I was in college. I got bored. And then I decided to do some stuff on the internet. I made $1 on AdSense. I'm like, oh, this is kind of cool. And then it turned into a website. I sold that in 2011. And then after that, I got into brokering. And it's been like that ever since.
That's crazy. That's
wow.
That's
so pretty much that's just my whole life up to this point. Nothing
very
else.
Cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
And you're just for my personal interests, the site that what was the niche of the site that you built?
So the first site I did was called onlinejobsforstudents.com because I didn't want a regular job. I just wanted to do something online. So
very cool.
That's what I did. Yeah, it was just a little basic content site, just monetized with affiliates.
And it was all the stuff you were interested in, obviously.
Yeah.
Very cool. David, how about yourself? Can you give us a little bit about your background, how you got here?
Yes, absolutely. So where should I begin? I went to business school at Washington University in St. Louis. Spent about 12 years in a banking and finance career. Ended up in New York around 1992. And then right around the time of the very first internet boom, I decided to leave my banking career. This was in 1999. Mm-hmm. Started working with startups at that time as an advisor mostly, and then eventually ended up with an email marketing company that I ran for 12 years here in New York. It was called West Broadway Media. And I ran that until about 2015 when I decided I wanted to explore the world of income-producing web businesses.
Nice.
And so I started that as a personal journey, buying and selling some small sites initially until I found one that I wanted to stick with that's in the print-on-demand space. Okay. It was a canvas art reproductions company called E-Wall Art. And that experience got me very interested in the brokering process because of the buying and selling that I did. I learned about what I thought was being done well in the brokering business and what maybe wasn't being done so well. And I thought I could add some value to that. So 2016, I started DJC Digital Brokers, and here we are.
Very cool. Very cool. And now, so the two of you are both brokers, but you've joined forces on this new initiative. Can you talk a little bit about what this new initiative is?
Go for it, dude.
Me? Okay. So, well, I became familiar with Ryan, I guess when I was learning about the brokering industry. Acquisition Station was one of the businesses that came across my radar, and I got to know Ryan a little bit. He was actually helped me guide me a little bit in the early stages of me developing my brokerage. And he and I were in touch over the last couple of years. And at some point last year, 2018, we were chatting and just sort of talking about, what are we seeing in the marketplace? And both of us commented, I remember the phone call very well. We both commented that the phone was ringing a lot from potential buyers of cannabis-related businesses.
Nice.
And so I guess a light bulb came on for both of us. We thought, hey, maybe this is a niche that we could provide some expertise in, maybe own it, be the first or the leading brokerage focusing just on those businesses. So December of last year, we made a decision and jumped in with Green Rock Network.
Yes.
So that's how we got that started.
Very cool. Very cool.
Oh, yeah.
I have so many questions for you guys, both on what you're seeing in the online business space and specifically what you're seeing in the cannabis space. As you guys very well know, I also own an online cannabis business, and I'm just so curious about just the speed at which it's moving and the things that are popping up. It's crazy. So,
well, I can actually tell you about that. Well, I can tell you about the first one. It kind of leads into that first question that David was saying about how we got together. I actually sold the first content site in the space, and the buyers were going crazy for it. So it was just like, it had to happen.
Yeah.
Right. And we can go into more detail about that later, but
definitely want to totally dive into that space, because I think there's it's just so much noise and there's so much going on, and there's actually a lot of confusion and misinformation. So it'll be cool to get information from people that are right there in it and managing it. So I'd love to just talk more broadly, because I don't know if everybody out there really understands what a business broker does. So maybe we can start at kind of that high level. What is a business broker, and what are you guys around for? What do you do?
Oh yeah. So essentially what we're doing is we're taking something really complicated and making it as simple as possible for the sellers. I mean, people have been running their business for, say, a few years, or sometimes even in the case of an online business for 19, 20 years. And they just need help finding the right kind of buyers that are qualified, that are going to take the business forward and hopefully grow it. And of course, get the right price for it and sell it for in the right kind of time frame. And that's what we do. And we have the buyers for it, and we present it in a way that makes sense and takes away all the stress, or at least as much stress as possible for the seller.
Got it. And so, I mean, I've always equated this very similarly to real estate, right? Having a real estate
absolutely.
agent.
It's a perfect analogy or metaphor, whatever you want to call it. It's the land itself without any kind of development is just the domain. But then you have something on it, you have a business on it, and then it becomes a website, it becomes a business, and it's very similar.
Very cool. And then why would a seller, because I'm assuming there's obviously fees like in any other industry, why would a seller not just opt to try to sell their business on their own?
Well, if they can, then they would. I mean, that's as simple as it is. It's like, it's cliche to say that, but that's just how it is.
Very good. That makes sense.
I mean, I could add a little something to that, Laurent. I mean, I think that, the just like real estate, buying and selling a business is something that, although in our industry, I think we're all familiar with people who do this a lot, do this regularly. But for most people, buying a business is something you maybe only do a few times in your life. So the process is detailed, and there are wrinkles and nuances to buying and selling a business that guys like Ryan and I are dealing with those wrinkles every day. So I think we're in a position to help guide our buyers and sellers to a smooth transaction.
Got it. I have to say, being on the buy side, when I work with a broker, their structure, which is nice, right? When you find somebody who just tries to sell it on their own, they typically haven't done the work of getting their P&L together.
Oh yeah, that's
they don't know where their information is, and brokers always they have to prepare for the sale, right? So they're making sure that those sellers are putting things together. So from a buyer's lens, I definitely appreciate the fact that the package is clean.
right.
Yeah, it's huge, because some sellers don't have no idea how much money they actually make when they start breaking it down, especially on those expense lines. So it's
Yeah, especially on the expenses.
yeah.
But also with that, there's the human component and the emotions that go into it. I've said this before, but I feel like a therapist a lot of the time, just because there are so many different things going on. I mean, you go through the entire range of emotions throughout a sale. You got to be prepared for that.
Oh, I'm sure from a seller's lens, it's selling their baby. Like, some of these sites have been around for 10 years and they worked on it every day, right? It's totally understand. So you guys are specifically in the online business space, correct?
I am.
Okay.
David,
Yes,
you are
we both
too.
are.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So why would somebody who's potentially thinking of leaving a corporate job to be an entrepreneur, why would they focus on online versus brick and mortar?
Dude, that's all you did.
Okay.
Yeah, you got
All
that.
Right. Well, I mean, I was looking at Laurent. You provided some notes before the podcast. I looked at that question and was thinking, who would buy a hardware store these days? You know, I guess the simple answer is, particularly when you're talking about the real estate related to a traditional business, you add this additional burden that doesn't exist in the digital world. It doesn't mean that there aren't other opportunities in the brick and mortar side of things that don't exist in digital. But for example, foot traffic, right? If you have a business on a busy street, well, people are going to walk in. Well, in the digital world, you have to get them there somehow. We have to create that traffic. But mainly, I think it's the cost of the overhead in a traditional business, that this huge hurdle that you have to jump, that you don't have to. The hurdle is lower, let's say, in the digital world.
That makes a ton of sense. Let me ask you as well. So the sellers that you're seeing who come to you, because what I liked about online business is really the flexibility. I mean, if I want to work on it at 2:00 in the morning, I create my own hours. If I have to travel, as long as I get internet access, I have the ability to manage my business, which I love, that fluidity and flexibility. So somebody who's selling their business right now, what kind of people are they? Like, why would you sell a business that can be very automated and at times doesn't have a lot of workload? Can you give me, because I'm interested in seeing the kinds of people that are coming to you to sell their business.
Yeah, I could give you some examples. So somebody who's been in it for, say, 20 years, they just want to change a pace and they want to do something else. They might be looking at buying a house. They might just be tired of running it. And there may not be anything wrong with the business. They just want to get out. And there are a lot of people in this space that are like cats. They're just like, oh crap, whoa, that's cool, woo. Like, they just want to try different things. And that's just how it is. They start a business and they actually build it to sell it, and then they sell it and they start something else. And that happens quite a lot. And there's other situations where the business is not doing great and they don't know what to do with it, and they just need to sell it while it still has value. And that happens a lot too.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, I would say, with regard to that, in my experience, and it may be a little different than Ryan's experience, but I've noticed that I'd say more than half of the businesses that I'm selling are in a flat or declining position. Now that doesn't always mean the business is in trouble, so to speak, but
no.
From the perspective of a buyer, that raises all these questions that have to be answered. So
sure.
I think more often than not, people wait a little too long to sell.
That's true.
They wait until their business is is beginning to decline. And usually if they sell if they don't have a good strategy for turning it around.
Got it. And so part of what you're offering to sellers is a review of the site with kind of like your recommendation of where you think the site can go, how to turn it around. Is that kind of what sellers can expect?
Typically the sellers provide ideas on what they would do.
Okay.
Just kind of give them a little bit of a base. But the great thing is that buyers come in with their own perspective and their own plans and their own strengths and resources. And, that's just what we try to do, is match them up so that it's, a good fit and the best potential for success.
Got it. Excellent. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So, you guys have been in the space for a while. What are some of the trends? Like what are some of the hottest monetization methods right now that you're seeing that are really driving the higher multiples? I know a few years ago, everybody wanted an FBA site. Like what's the latest? What's happening right now in the market?
You want to grab this, David?
Yeah,
I can add in some ideas too.
That's another question I saw on your list that I thought it said there's a nuanced answer to that. Again, this is my perspective, and Ryan might have a different one, but I see right now, it's hard to say what's hot. I would say all of the major monetization strategies have their own unique challenges right now. Amazon, FBA, the Amazon platform is notoriously fickle. Concerns, people get concerned about, being at the exposed to the whims of Amazon's policies, and commerce businesses. I think you can't really. It's hard to resell something profitably on a long-term basis. So you need a unique branded product that costs money, that takes talent. So that's another hurdle in the commerce space. In the content space, Google is the fickle one. You've got all kinds of stuff going on with SEO strategies, where it can be very difficult to manage changes in the Google algorithm.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And that's a particular expertise is required to do that well. And then in the software business, the so-called SaaS industry, there's a lot of expertise required there as well. And those businesses are usually more stable, but it takes an awful lot more to build a business that's serving a need in that space. So I'd say it's hard to say what's really hot right now. All of those monetization strategies require a different skill set.
Yeah, I agree with that. They're all hot. It just depends on what people are getting into. There's always going to be some kind of trend. Like Amazon FBA was a huge thing, and content sites had their heyday, but they're still very popular. Mm-hmm. And I think it just really comes down to the vertical that's hot, like cannabis, or vaping about 5-6 years ago when it first came out was really hot online. And then of course you had like info products were really huge back in the 2008, mm-hmm. right around there. You guys all remember that phase.
Yeah.
Dave, you were right in the thick of it with like email marketing back in the early 2000s. So it was like you always have kind of a phase, but right now it's just pretty much everything is go. I mean, everybody's just going crazy. It's still Wild West.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think the vertical is more important than the monetization strategy in terms of being hot.
Got it. So let's dive into that. Obviously, cannabis right now is exploding. We'll talk about it a little bit more later. Are there other verticals that you would stay away from or that you would double down on right now?
Ooh. Good question.
Oh,
you got one, Dave.
Ryan, why don't you take that one? What verticals should we stay away
Pass
from?
the hot potato.
The ones that I would stay away from, I mean, obviously there's the ones that most buyers stay away from. Gambling, adult industry, the ones where it's like you can make a ton of money in those, but they're always going to have there's going to be risk involved with it. You look at cannabis, and of course we're going to go into it later, but it is looking like it's going to be legalized federally, at least here in the U.S. over the next maybe 5 years, if all goes well. And that's something that's a wave that's forming that hasn't hit its peak yet, and that's something that you should be looking for. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, other ones that I think is building is video content.
Okay.
Facebook is on board. YouTube is always going to be popular and is going to continue to grow. Essentially, what we're doing is we're just trying to get people's attention, and that's what everybody is competing for in business in general.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I mean, video content that's easy to consume and that is valuable and good information is always going to be good too. I mean, when it comes to anything, those are just a couple of things that pop up.
Yeah. Is there stuff you'd stay away from? I mean, I had heard from other people that things like pets are a bit saturated, fitness is saturated.
They're always saturated, but there's always going to be money in it if you can just carve a little piece.
Carve it out, yeah. That's true. That's true. I think I told you guys I used to own an e-commerce site that sold pillows, and it was crazy from the moment I bought it to the moment I sold it. The amount of individuals that came into this space between, you know, My Pillow and Amazon starting to create their own brand of pillows, and it was astronomical how quickly the market flipped on me. So that was
I know, isn't that crazy? Learning. Like, you take something as like silly as pillows, and you just create this cool brand, some good marketing behind it, and you got yourself an amazing business. All right, I have a couple other examples. Dollar Shave Club. You just took shaving and they blew it up, that business, because I saw it from the beginning and I paid attention to their marketing strategy. Their little like reader thing that they give for the bathroom is awesome. It's like this little Reader's Digest, and that was really cool. And so I paid attention to that and their subscription model and priced it right, and that was great. And now another one that I've been seeing quite a lot for is mattresses. You know, I mean, for the last couple of years, they took mattresses and they have some cool marketing campaigns with the eggs and the funny internet, the funny YouTube stuff. And then also sunglasses with this. I'm not going to say specifically because I'm not trying to like promote any kind of brand, but you take sunglasses and you make them good quality and you have a good marketing campaign and you take it over, you know, just an old vertical, and you can still dominate.
It's so funny that you brought all three of those up, because there was that one big company that came out and was, like you said, really creative on their marketing. And then the amount of knockoffs that came out, like Dollar Shave Clubs, there's maybe 12 or 15 of them out there that now do the same thing.
And it was just shaving. It was a shaving membership club, right? It's like they didn't reinvent the wheel. They just had really good marketing and they built a good brand. So
yeah. And now they're fighting with a bunch of, you know, it's
other random
the price
shave
point.
clubs.
Very good. So talking about pricing, what are you guys seeing right now on the multiples in terms of what's trending? Are they going up? Are they going down? Are they kind of flat right now? Are they still kind of at a 3x? Where are things going?
David?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you my perspective. You know, the conventional wisdom is that they will go up because of the demand side, I think. I'm seeing that in my transactions, but honestly, so far, let's say the last 12 months, I'd say it's a pretty modest increase.
Okay.
I'm not seeing significant growth, but yeah, they do hover around, as you mentioned, 30 months, 2.5 years, and you know that it depends on a lot of other factors. But yeah, I'd say they're hovering and increasing slightly.
Yeah, I've found the same thing as well, as that, you know, obviously over the last few years, they've been increasing because there's been a lot more buyers in the space, a lot more retail buyers, people that have come from the offline world, real estate and traditional investments coming online. And then of course, supply on the sell side is always going to be pretty low in terms of quality stuff. So the prices have remained pretty steady. I was going to go back to something else from the last question, is that other languages and other international markets are starting to come up in the online space, you know, like in Latin America or in Europe with other languages. Sites are making money and the valuations are still pretty low in terms of just being able to get in and get a good site that's making good money. It's been around for a while. So look at international markets as well in other languages.
Yeah, very interesting. Laurent, I'd like to just give a plug for Acquisition Station, because Acquisition Station does specialize somewhat in foreign language.
We dabble in some of them. We've sold a number of foreign language sites and international stuff. So, thanks, dude.
And so does a buyer, in your view, does a buyer need to be able to speak that language to be successful? I'm sure it's an advantage, but are some of these businesses automated?
Yeah. Oh
okay.
yeah, most of them we try to make it like English and North American market friendly. Just be able to take it over. Have either a bilingual team or have a team on there that you can, just be able to keep it running.
Got
easily.
it. Perfect. Okay. Kind of closing off the business broker side, what do you recommend for someone who is selling a business, what they should look for in finding the right broker for them? Other than just picking your brokerage, which is the best thing you can do, clearly.
I mean, when it comes down to it, you just want to be able to work with them well, like have a good working relationship with them, and obviously a good track record, and being able to match them up to the right kind of buyer. So those are a few things that you want. Of course, you want to get good terms too. You don't want to get screwed on the commission, which, by the way, industry standards are anywhere from like 10 to 15%, but it is flexible. Most brokers are flexible.
Okay.
We try not to undercut it too much, but when it comes down to it, you want to make it a good transaction for everybody involved and everybody be motivated. That's my perspective. What do you think, David?
Yeah, that's really it's a tricky one, because I'm thinking about the transactions that I've done. The transactions that I've done that went well, I had a good connection with the buyer or seller. I do work with both buyers and sellers, which maybe we can talk about a little bit later, Lauren. But having that understanding of their business, understanding their personal needs, a lot of the businesses that we represent are relatively small, and people are selling them or buying them for important personal reasons, like they're getting married or having a baby or moving somewhere. And so that transaction is really important to them. And I think as a broker, understanding the reason why someone's buying or selling is just as important as getting them the best price.
Oh yeah, it's totally important.
That's huge. I mean, this is probably one of the biggest decisions of their lives, right? Buying a business is not a small investment for many, and other than their home, it's and it takes up a ton of time in a lot of sense. So you want to make sure you have the right relationship with your broker, and that they're guiding you in the right way to so that you're happy by the time it's done. So it makes a lot of sense.
Exactly.
Yeah. True.
So guidance, that actually segues very well into kind of my next line of questioning. Somebody who wants to get into the space. So maybe somebody who's in corporate right now wants to create a side hustle for themselves, or is really fed up and just wants to leave and start their own business. Recommendations for them on where to start. Like, is there, and could be anything from niche to monetization method. Somebody maybe doesn't have a ton of experience in the space. Where do they begin?
It's all you, David.
Okay. Thanks, Ryan. I'll take it.
Hey, you're buy side, baby.
My experience with that is it sort of depends on. Here's how I approach that. If someone is agnostic to vertical, I get this a lot. I think Ryan probably hears this a lot. People come into the business and they say, "Hey, I just want to buy a profit-making digital business," and that's their criteria. Of course, that's very difficult to work with as a buyer's broker, because we look for specific types of businesses. So when I get those kinds of opportunities presented to me, what I try to do is understand the person and their personal passions and expertise. Because usually people will be very successful at businesses that they understand. And so if I can figure out what their hobbies might be, what their business background might be, that usually helps guide me to a vertical that might make sense for that person. Beyond that, I would say when people are starting out, personally, I find in terms of monetization strategy, I like to guide people towards content businesses first, because they are simpler to manage, simpler to understand. It's not to say that there aren't risks that are very significant that take talent and skill to manage. But it's easier, I think, to start out in a content business than a commerce business, or certainly a software business.
Got it. There's definitely less, I would say, overhead on a content business than an e-commerce business typically, right? You don't have to manage inventory and in most cases buy in extremely high volumes. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Okay. So you've actually said this a couple of times. I don't think we've necessarily addressed it. So buyer side versus seller side brokering, right? So you're focused, I think you do both, but can you explain a little bit the difference between a buyer side broker versus a seller broker?
Yes. If you think of the analogy to real estate, for example, a traditional real estate brokerage is a sell-side brokerage. They primarily represent the interests of the seller, the owner of the real estate, in the case of real estate, or the owner of the business, in the case of our industry. And so you're focused on presenting that business to the marketplace in a way that makes it look good and attractive to buyers. In our market, and part of the reason that I started DJC Digital Brokers and focused on buy side is because when I first got into the industry, I was a buyer myself, and I felt a little bit, what's the word? I don't want to say underappreciated, but I just feel like the industry focused so much on the sell side that the buyer is left to figure everything out for themselves. I thought maybe I could offer some services to buyers that would just help them, empower them a little bit. One of the things that I developed is an outbound search process that I offer to buyers that allows them to find businesses that might not be on the market. And we try to convert those opportunities to listings on behalf of the buyers. And that just gives the buyer a little more control. It can be a difficult process, and it's not always successful, but it's a process that allows you to find the business that you think you want to buy. Mm-hmm. What we do is we find a seed company, a business or a website that looks like the business that the buyer would like to purchase. And then we identify all the other competitors in that space and do an outreach to them. And there's a surprisingly high response rate to that process. But that gives the buyer a sense of control. And so buy-side brokers are focused on serving the needs of the buyer.
Got it. And it makes a ton of sense when you look at, to your point, many people buying a business will buy one. And so they don't have the experience of how do you negotiate? What is the buying process? And having somebody in your corner that walks you through it. I just went through a 6-month negotiation on a deal that I ended up walking away from. And as I was going through that process, there were so many things that came up. And not that the broker was doing anything wrong, but it was clear that his fiduciary responsibilities were to the seller. And so there were things I'm like, you can't really call that profit. You can't really call, right? And I was lucky enough to have had that experience to go through that. But somebody else probably would have left a lot of money on the table had they not set somebody in their corner to assist.
I'll give you a specific example, addressing what you just mentioned. In our industry, you guys are both very familiar with this. The listeners may not be, but we have the concept of seller's discretionary earnings, right? SDE. And usually the seller and the seller's broker are calculating, I like to call it a proposal, right? It's not a definitive calculation. The seller says, okay, I have a business. There are some expenses in this business that the new buyer would not have to incur because maybe it's my rent on my office, or I paid myself a salary that I wouldn't have to pay someone to run this business in the future. So you make all those adjustments. Well, sometimes those adjustments can be, let's say, just what's the word? Discretionary, a little aggressive.
Yes.
And so as a buyer's broker, one of the things that I do, and I try to have my buyers just relax a little bit when they see these kinds of aggressive SDE adjustments. And what we do is we propose an SDE calculation of our own.
Yeah.
So that's a very helpful exercise. It simply says, okay, you, Mr. Seller, you think this expense doesn't carry forward to the buyer, but we have a different view. We think maybe we will have to incur some of these expenses. And so our offer will be based on that calculation.
Exactly.
And you get aggressive, and then there's a middle line where everybody negotiates to.
There's always a middle line, and what I do on the seller side is I try to prep them that buyers are going to be doing that, and they know going into it that there's going to be an interpretation of that, and because it's going to vary between all the different buyers. So yeah, they're prepped, and so hopefully you're able to find a middle ground.
Yeah. Very good. So going back to somebody brand new to the space that's looking to dive in, we talked about a monetization method that you guys would suggest. What's kind of the entry level price tag of a site? And I know it very much depends on, you know, what the SDE is.
Like 20 to 30,000. And
so somebody should assume that.
Something that's making anywhere from say $1,000 to $1,500 a month. I don't sell anything typically under $1,000 a month, and try to get something that's over a year old at least, just so that you have an entire year, so you can see all the different seasons of the business, at least 1 year worth. And so that's kind of a good entry point, is 20 to 30.
Okay.
I'd say. And that's for my side.
Yeah. And I think that makes a lot of sense. I think there's obviously a ton of competition at that lower level.
There is.
So those sites tend to sell very quickly. So a buyer needs to kind of be ready and have all their ducks in a row, in my experience, so that you know, otherwise they're losing out on some of those best opportunities that will sell. And I've seen some sell in a day. It's pretty crazy.
Oh yeah.
That's why you need a buy side broker.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the benefit of what you've done, of being able to automate a process to go out and find these businesses, is that there is no one else knocking on that door. So you have a little bit of time to tell that potential seller, listen, I have a buyer for you, you know, get your money, get your numbers together, and we'll evaluate, versus, you know, that high competition that happens at the lower end of the marketplace on market deals.
Yeah.
Good point. Okay. So back to somebody kind of starting off, what niches would you say they should look at? So, you know, obviously content sites make it easy. Is there kind of also, other than cannabis, is there another angle that they should be looking at as well when they're looking to kind of buy something new?
Yeah, personal interest, like David was saying, is more important than people realize. Even if you got something that's pretty passive, I wouldn't say there's even a truly passive online business, because you have to be involved in some capacity. You can't just let it sit. You know, like, you have to be personally interested in some capacity, I think. Because, you know, you're going to want to check up on it. You're going to want to talk to your people working on it and just make sure everything is good.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
I mean, that's just one thing to consider, but obviously there's so many different factors when it comes down to it. And you just have to, like, you got to have your ducks in a row before you make the purchase.
Okay. Is there anything that people should avoid when they're looking at sites? I mean, you guys talked a little bit about sites that are coming on the market that are aggressively kind of dropping in terms of traffic and things like that. But
oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, what are some of the big red flags?
Dude, one red flag that I see is that if I suddenly get a certain type of business listing or lead, and then a bunch of other ones come in, say 3 or 4. If I get one of them that's kind of random, like, oh, yeah, this is cool, somebody's selling one of these sites. Let's just say like a gaming forum or something like that. And then say I get like 5 gaming forum leads in the next couple weeks. I'm like, something went down. You have to find out if there's an overall problem with maybe regulation, say like with vaping, you know, like any kind of flavored cartridges. People who are in the e-commerce vaping space just got screwed bad based on that ruling federally. And so something that, if you see a little bit of movement in the market with some leads, then something might have gone down, and you have to look at the overall vertical.
That's very interesting. I had
that's a little red flag. So yeah.
Okay. So what else? So traffic going down, like you said, in industry laws, things like that are changing. Is there anything else that you recommend just staying away from?
What do you think, David?
I mean, I think a lot of this is instinctual. I'm thinking about examples of where I may have guided someone away. I tend to, I mean, what Ryan said is absolutely true. When there's something going on in a niche, and of course, Ryan and I are both dealing with businesses in many, many niches, so we aren't experts in every niche. So I know I end up doing, I think Ryan was just alluding to that, research when I see multiple businesses in a particular niche all coming online at the same time. I've got to do some research. But I don't know that there's any other broad-based things to look out for. It's more specific, I think, to the buyer. If there's a mismatch, right? If there's a mismatch between the buyer's skills and whatever the niche requires for success, that's really, for me, that's the red flag. If SEO is an interesting one because the SEO, in order to be successful at SEO, you've really got to be on top of the trends all the time. And while I know I mentioned a moment ago that I would recommend newbies start out in the content business, the big asterisk there is you have to, depending on the site, you really have to understand how your site is exposed to the vagaries of the SEO at that time. And that can change. So it's, for me, it's more about the match between the buyer's skills and the skills required to be successful in that niche.
Got it. Okay, we're going to end the first half of the interview at this point, and we'll get the rest of the interview in part 2, which will happen next week. Hope you enjoyed it so far. Thanks for staying tuned, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Mad Profit Podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, or the listening platform of your choice. Also, check us out at madxcapital.com for more useful information and resources to help you achieve your investing, entrepreneurial, and business goals. See you next week on the Mad Profit Podcast.